everyone. Happy Friday. I am Emma Lowe from CS in Focus, and thank you so much for joining us live with Anthony and Roland. And today we're going to talk about Forecast 2026. Okay, before we get in, let's have a short introduction. Roland, Anthony, you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure, I can go. Hi, everybody. Roland Griesmayer. I head the revenue division at GHD Digital.
And I'm Anthony DeShazor. I'm CEO and founder, and I call myself the chief architect of Protia Revenue Systems.
Yeah. So the first questions to the audience, please put in where you are, or are you doing your forecast right now? As today we're talking about 2026 forecasting. Well, Roland, I have to ask you, did you finish your forecast at this point, or you're still in the middle of it?
So we're on a different fiscal schedule. Our forecast, we do our forecasting in June and July. So our fiscal starts in July. So we're just heading into the end of H2, where I can say we're on forecast. We're actually $1 million over forecast at this point, which is nice. So
Congrats.
So I would say, yeah, we're doing well, and we're heading into the direction we thought we were going to.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I know we have questions in the head, and I'm really interested in how do you even $1 million over forecast, and how do you design that, especially you're at HQ already.
Yeah, so we're heading into H2, which is nice, and with a nice cushion going into H2, $1 million ahead of budget. I think for us the number one thing that we did was we aligned ourselves with a sales methodology, right? So when we do our forecasting, all reps are talking the same language. And I think, I mean, I've talked about this. We haven't, from a sales leadership perspective, we're always probably within 3 or 4% of our forecast that we provide to my executive leadership team. We're extremely accurate. And that starts, to be honest, from the CEO down, and the buy-in that she's given us, and the way that she participates in our forecasting and stuff. So I would say there's a whole science to it, but it's easier than it sounds.
You mentioned key things about 3-4% to the board. That is kind of how you report is differently, and also how you align the sales methodology. Right?
Yeah. So when I started at GHD, there was no, all the reps were talking different languages, right? When we were doing our forecasting and all that stuff, we were all talking different languages. We came together and we aligned to, we settled on the value selling methodology. We then inputted that into our CRM. The reps have the fields that they have to fill out. We then integrated that with Gong and their signals. So we now have a very accurate way to assess deal health, right? Even the way we do forecasting with our CEO, she's involved in our pipeline reviews with the reps. So to me, that's made the biggest difference, is including our CEO into our monthly pipeline reviews and our cadences. So I'd say, there's a mixture of things that are going on, but that's been the biggest game changer for my team, is including our CEO into our monthly and quarterly forecasting.
Oh, wow. I mean, you actually mentioned 3 things there, I think, that most companies don't necessarily have, that I would love to just, kind of highlight. One, you have executive buy-in from top to bottom, where everyone's speaking the same language, everyone knows the same stages, the same, criteria for each stage to look at different risks in the buying process. That's absolutely 2 major things. But the third, you have everything running in through your CRM. So you're not sitting around trying to collect things and have a web of 15 different spreadsheets trying to figure out some model. You've built this right into the fabric of your entire revenue system, your CRM. So how was that something you inherited, or was that something you were able to push through?
No, again, I would say that was, if you don't know GHD, just a quick background, GHD is a global professional services firm specializing in architecture and engineering, civil engineering. We're building a SaaS company within a huge professional services firm. So the norm was spreadsheets galore, all this stuff, right? So my job when I came in to run the SaaS business at GHD was to really standardize all this stuff, right? Get it in Salesforce or get it into HubSpot. Have a repeatable, predictable process. And it honestly, to me, it has to come top down, right, from our CEO down. And she bought in, and again, we went from, never being able to forecast a month, let alone a quarter or a year. And now we're within 3 to 4%. Like I would say 97% of our commit and upsides come in on a monthly, quarterly basis. We rarely have slippage because we forecast so tightly. And the reps, right? The reps are integrated into that. They know when they're showing up to that forecasting call with myself and the CEO, they have to be prepared. All the fields in HubSpot have to be filled out. Next steps, you have to show me, if you're committing a deal, you have to show me the list, right? Then you can commit it. If not, it gets moved out. And if you're the only rep that's showing up to a meeting with our CEO and myself that isn't prepared, doesn't have the fields filled in, and or you don't have upside and commit for the month, you're right. You don't want to be that rep, right? So that's
I can feel the weight already.
Yeah. Creating
feel the weight.
And again, it just comes from the top down. So that's been our approach.
Nice.
When you mentioned value selling, what is a kind of when we talk about signal, like how do you make it so tight then agree on? How do you know which to look out for?
So we have, I think we have about six different signals that we look for. So does the rep have a business issue? Are we solving a problem? Are they solving a business problem in the organization? Do we have the desired solution? Do we have the right solution that fits that problem, right? Or are we stretching it? Are we still scoping it? Is it still out with development, right? Do we have the desired solution ready to go out the door? Do we have power, right? Are we talking to the right person? Do we have the plan? And then do we have next steps? Those are kind of, if you, and they all have to be articulated. They can't be yes, no, talking next week. It's like they are filled out. I feel like I was talking to Emma about this a couple of weeks ago when we talked about, like, I was looking at some AI solutions that fill in all this stuff, right, from your recordings, and right, there's all these AI tools out there. And I really wanted to stay old school on this one. Like I get flack for this all the time because it's like, you guys can automate these things, right? You don't have to fill them in HubSpot, but like, I want them to fill it in. I want them to know what the problem is, right? What they're solving, who they're talking to, right? If AI just inherently fills all this stuff in, then what are you really learning? Do you really know your customer? And do you really know what you're committing? Because AI just took, garbage from here and put it into there, right? So like, I make them fill it out, and it might be old school of me, but I make them fill it out. It does take a little bit, but then that's how we get to the 3 or 4%, like, on target. Like, we know what is going to come in each month, and it could be like we're going to forecast a not good month, right? Or we're going to forecast a great month, but there is no surprise to my executive leadership team at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year, whether it's low or high, right? I can be like, we don't have enough. We do not have enough. And I've been there where we're like, yeah, we just don't have enough pipeline, or we don't have enough in commit. And then we blow it out of the water, and it's like, well, how did you not know these were going to come in, right? So it ends up you looking like the fool, not knowing your business.
Yeah, I mean, I love the strategy you have. There's something to be said about the act of completing the form. To your point, there's no magic that surpasses knowing the customer and their customer's problem. So I love that approach that you have. I do have a question though. Your methodology definitely seems to be well tuned for acquisition. How do you look at renewals of existing customers and upsell?
Same way. We don't change it.
Perfect.
Yeah. And that right. If we're, I would say in our business for upsells and expansion, if you're not solving a problem, like we typically, it's not transactional. It's not, $1,000 or $500
Sure.
widget, right? Like if we're expanding, we're expanding a product or a main feature. You got to be solving a problem, right? People aren't, and especially we sell into government. They don't just spend money. Well, spend money willy nilly, but we have to be, transparency in government is real these days, right? Especially when it comes to spending taxpayer funded money. So they have to be solving a problem. They're not coming to us to just buy stuff to get things off the books. So I don't treat new logo acquisition any different than I treat my customer success, my account management team.
That's perfect, particularly for that vertical. I think for that vertical that you're dealing with government, the way they make decisions is the same for renewals and new software or new solutions. It's the same process, same procurement process. In other businesses and other verticals, there's actually different buying patterns and different buying strategies when you're looking at either renewing an existing tool or acquiring a new one. I've worked in companies where if it's just something within budget, the VP can just sign off of it because it's already been allocated, everything's there. But if it's something new, it may need to go through a whole new cycle because it's out of budget or it wasn't something anticipated. So I do love the fact that you have something that's very tailored for your vertical.
Yeah.
I have a question from an audience. I'm going to pull it up. I have one question from Jen. So for you, I think the question for Roland, what criteria had the most impact in predicting accuracy? And then I'll ask the same questions for you, Anthony.
Sure.
It all comes down to what business issue are we solving, right? I would say money follows problems, right? So if you're solving a problem, there's money to be made, there's money to be had. So to me, the biggest criteria that I look at, or the most important criteria that I look at every single time, is what business issue am I solving, or what business issue are you solving? Why are they spending that money, right? It's things like it's going to make somebody's job easier. It's more intuitive. To me, that's not solving a problem, right? That's right. If I go to my CEO and say, hey, this is going to make my life easier, can I get 50 grand? Sorry, see you later, right? But if I'm solving a real world problem, that's when I know I have a deal. That's when I know my reps have a deal. Could a deal come in with other criteria and we're not solving a business issue? Sure, right? But it's not as predictable as if you're solving a real problem. So I need them to articulate what that problem is.
I would have to double click on that one. When I look at forecasting, particularly renewals, I look at three things. I look at what I call a health score or a health metric, which is what's the relationship health? How do we know the right people? Are we connected to the right people? I look at value, which I call a user signal. Let's see, are we making people actually the heroes? Can we put a number on it? Because that's the key thing I'm looking for, is are we helping the users of our product achieve their goals, and do we know what those goals are? Is there a number,
right?
Yeah, it has to be qualified. I look for it both ways. It needs to be quantifiable, but I also look at the experience, qualifiable. Is it something that they can actually feel? Because when you're dealing with retention, particularly in a commoditized space, it's not just about can I get to that goal, whatever that is how do I feel when I get to that goal? Mm-hmm. That's what really makes something sticky, is that you help me hit that goal, but you're doing it in such a way that you're making me feel better about the whole scenario. The number absolutely matters more, but having that 1-2 punch really helps build trust. And then the third signal I look for, I call the buying signals. This is where if you cannot tell me the problem you're solving, I can't really count that into any forecast, be it a 90-day forecast, 180-day forecast, or even a year forecast. If we don't know the problem we're solving, and if we don't know the people for whom that solve matters, that's going to actually sign on the bottom line, then that to me is going to be something that drops off the forecast. So I would totally agree with you that the most important signal, regardless of where you are, what time frame you're looking to forecast, is what are the buyers? Do you know the buying decision? Do you know the problems they're trying to solve, and how your solution actually helps them hit that number?
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, this is actually answer Jen's second question here. What was the process against those problems in renewals and expansion? Solving the problem, right?
Yeah, for me, this is where renewals is slightly different from acquisition, in that I have this story that I tell very quickly, is that when you're doing acquisition, you're selling vision. You're saying a vision of a value. Hey, listen, based upon companies like this is what we've been able to achieve, and we think we can do the same for you. When you're in renewal, I have to go prove that I delivered on that vision or that value that you expected. Mm-hmm. So when I'm dealing with existing customers, yes, I still want to know those buying decisions. But even if I know the buying decisions, if I can't go back and prove that I've actually delivered that value, I still put that at risk. Because those value decisions or that buying decision can switch at any moment. And so when you're in the renewal space, I have to sell the fact that we actually achieved the value, but I also need to sell that the value received last year or last period is going to continue in your next period or even get better. And it's still relevant. So I still have to cast a vision and understand what problems our software is still solving, but I also have to prove that we've solved the problems you had. So I have to do both. And so when you deal with expansion, you have to build on the success you've had in renewals, build on that success, that trust that you've built there, or else they're really going to look at you and kind of question. At that point, if you can't stand on that trust, you've opened the door for a competitor to come in and say, hey, I know they failed you here. Why would you trust them with something else? So you absolutely have to stand on the trust of what you've already delivered.
Yeah, I totally agree, right? And that's why I think like it worked to me. It works both ways, right? Even from the expansion perspective, if you're not solving a problem that first time and you're going to renew them, how do you renew them? How do you renew them because you haven't solved the problem, right? It's just then it comes that's when churn happens, right? That's when right, if you haven't articulated the problem you solved and the value that you provided based on your first deal, right? It all flows through. That's when inevitably you're going to get that churn.
Yeah. I love the fact that you highlighted it's not just a matter of solving or providing the value, it's also how you communicate it. Mm-hmm. Because there's so many companies out there, their failure is not in delivering value. Their failure is not being able to tell the story of the value you delivered. I responded on a post earlier from someone today, and they absolutely nailed it. And it's basically, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around, did it even fall? Did it make a noise? If you delivered value and no one noticed, did you actually deliver value? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the view that many companies have to take, is not only do I deliver value, how well do I communicate the value that was delivered to the right people?
100%.
Like this is almost can use as internal as well.
Oh, absolutely. Those of us in CS, one of our biggest shortcomings is we don't know how to communicate our value. And I say that as past tense because I've seen a great improvement in our ability to do that. And you can look at some of the LinkedIn posts and some of the thought leaders out there that are championing this, and some that even have courses on this. It's been a great boon, I think, to the industry. But we have to be able to tell the value of what we deliver. What was the actual impact? Moving NPS is great, but what does that move in NPS, what does that translate in terms of revenue? It's being able to make that connection.
How do you get the reps to do that?
Yeah.
Oh, this is where I don't let the reps take it on themselves. My view is I build a system that allows them to do it. And so as a leader, I take the responsibility of helping them translate it and I teach that to them. So for one example, at one of my previous companies, I had a CSM who was helping, the company. It was a donation platform, so I had to describe it a little bit. So we're trying to get the organizations to better position us. Well, that's an influence game. If they can better position our product with their end users, that doesn't translate immediately to revenue that quarter. It typically takes a quarter after they improve the positioning before we can actually see a measurable increase in what's happening in the organization. It's one of these things like if you want to grow your presence on LinkedIn, you have to consistently post. Well, one of the things that we found is that in order to improve our consumption of our product, we had to consistently get the customer or the organization to position our product as the giving tool. So we built models that said if companies increase their reading or their positioning of our product by 5%, that translates into typically an X% growth in usage in 3 quarters. But that was me having to go and find that data so I can make the move in that positioning translate into actual dollars, at least as a leading indicator of dollars to come, because that's what mattered. When I sat around with the C-level, hey, great, usage went up, that's great. We're looking at the dollars. Hey, what does that mean for our forecast? What does that mean when we go, to pay bills, so to speak, and pay employees? Do we have the money coming in? Can we actually lean on that? So I built the system. I built the models that allowed my CSMs to then tell the story of their revenue impact. I didn't push that on them. I gave them the tools to do it.
Do you ever find that those signals become lagging and not leading?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. One of the things I don't like to manage is NRR, because NRR is an actual lagging indicator. And so whenever I need to move NRR, I always go through and try to force myself to find the leading indicators and build systems or OKRs to move those leading indicators, hoping or at least believing that those leading indicators will lead to the NRR that I'm looking for. At least there are places where I can, notch my journey and say I'm on the right way. But sometimes, those leading indicators don't really lead; they lag. The NRR jumps before the leading indicators indicated that they would jump. But most of the times when I find that, it's because I had the wrong leading indicator. That's something that looked to be a leading indicator really wasn't.
Yeah. Interesting.
Can you share one example that we're all looking in the wrong place?
So when there was an assumption that we have in customer success is that time to value, increasing or speeding up time to value, will lead to longer retention, and basically lead to longer lifetime value and all of that. Well, I've learned in some cases that's not really true. I think the theory out there is great. I think the data out there suggests that may be true, but it doesn't hold in every single company. In my last company, it didn't translate. Yes, getting them to value sooner, since we were an outcome-based company, absolutely drove more revenue, because that meant we were getting revenue earlier. But I couldn't find the data that specifically said that if they got to value faster, they will actually stay longer. I couldn't find that connection. Now, it mattered for us because, yes, that time to value decreasing that meant we got more revenue up front. Absolutely. So we may get more revenue for the lifetime they're there. So the overall, lifetime value may increase per year, so to speak, what we got for them per year, but it didn't necessarily increase the lifetime.
So it didn't increase the stickiness of them being around.
Correct. Correct. So it didn't increase the stickiness. We still have the same competitive value issues. It's a commoditized space where we coexisted with our competitors. So the fact that we got value quickly still did not remove that competitive pressure that was there.
Interesting.
So it's going back to that. I think Roland mentioned value-based selling. Are we solving the right problem?
In that scenario, it wasn't even about whether or not we're solving the right problem. The challenge is there were 15 other players solving the same problem. And so this is where experience mattered, because if we're all solving the same problem with relatively the same features, What ended up making the difference was how easy was it to solve? How much of a, how did it fit into their normal mechanism? What types of things I call it those secondary metrics, those things that you can't really put a number on or know it is one of these things. Like, I'll give a prime example. I'll make it very concrete. One of my customers in the last company used to brag to her givers about the haptics that happen when you gave on our app. She would boast about it. Something as simple as the phone vibrating when she made a donation made a difference for her. So while all the other tools, you can make a similar donation, but it's the very fact that how it felt to make that donation on our platform versus others that made the difference. So when you're in a commoditized space where you're all solving the same problem and you're doing it effectively or similarly, you have to think about then how can you differentiate yourself. This is where that emotional or that experience level lever comes in. Can I solve the same problem but do it with a better experience?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, it's reminding me of all these Black Friday deals coming up. How I don't know, what experience I have like buying on these platforms. So different. Yeah, interesting. I know we're talking about forecasting in 2026. Is there something like one thing you want to do differently this time, or keeping doing the same?
Is there something I would do differently? Ooh, that's a hard one to answer. I never like doing things like I never like just always doing the same thing. I'm always looking to tweak, make things better. I would say like I don't think I've adapted. I haven't been good at adapting AI enough in my forecast and in my productivity, right? And even with my reps. So to me, that's my number one goal. And I have a little bit of time, right? I'm not facing forecasting next year in a month or so. But I guess what I'm looking at now is how do I incorporate more AI into my forecasting, and just making it even more accurate, right? Like how do I get to that 99% forecast accuracy, and how do I help my reps be more efficient in that perspective, right? So that to me, that's what I'm looking at for making changes in the way I do things.
For me, what I'm helping customers with right now, the one or two that I'm working on forecasting, is actually redefining what an accurate forecast means. And you mentioned this earlier, Roland. In some spaces, you even upsides. If you are blinded by upsides, that's considered basically it's a bad look for you because it meant you didn't know your business enough to really be credible. I actually think that's the wrong lens. So I think the best rule of forecasting is I don't want to be surprised by the downside. I'm happy to surprise by the upside. I don't want to be surprised by the downside. And for that, and the reason why I want to take that approach is that forecasting really, you're trying to predict two classes of behaviors. You're trying to predict what your customer is going to do. What risks do you see in your customer? Can I do that? But you're also trying to predict how well will your company manage the risks that you see. And so when you're trying to model these two simultaneously to come up with a great forecast, that's a lot of variables. So if you can focus on optimizing, minimizing the downward pressure or the downward misses, that allows you to really tune in to making sure that you can detect the risks, but also how do you measure and push your team to manage and reverse those risks. Upside's great. I've never seen a company get penalized for blowing out the number. But I've seen executives killed because they missed it.
But if you're forecasting a down month and you blow it out of the water, that's what to me, like, right. And it yes, will that ever happen? 100%. But if it's month over month and you're forecasting down, and you're hitting your forecast and you're blowing it out of the water, or you're hitting, you don't even have to blow it out of the water, but if you're hitting plan and month after month you're forecasting down, that's gonna create mistrust with your executive leadership team, though.
100% agree. This is why you have different thresholds based upon the time scale of your forecast. What I mean by that, I typically have 3 forecasts running simultaneously. I have an annual forecast, I have a 6-month forecast, and I have a 90-day forecast. And then I manage pipeline under 90 days. So when I'm managing that pipeline in and under 90 days, I need to be accurate. I don't want to have surprises to the upside or downside. But to me, that's not forecasting necessarily. I'm actually managing pipeline. That I'm in that day-to-day sales or customer success renewal process, or I'm in that revenue management time frame. 90-day, all right, I'm already speaking a quarter out. Yeah, okay, I'm okay if I'm surprised by that because I have time to refine it with finer data as I get into that management exercise. 6 months out, yeah, I'm gonna be wildly off, so to speak, more off at 6 months than I am at 90 days. And when I get to the 30-day, I better be very, very accurate. A year out, that's the largest window where I know the least. So I totally agree with you. When it comes to that month-to-month pipeline management and actual execution, that's where I need to be spot on. Absolutely. I don't want to forecast that I'm going to be off this month and then blow it out by 2 times.
Yeah,
I lose trust there. But a year out, there's a lot that can change between now and a year. So it really depends on what time frame you're looking at for the forecasting as to the accuracy I'm looking for. So if I'm looking at 2026 and I'm looking at, hey, by the end of 2026, where will you be? Oh yeah, I'm managing the risk. I don't want to overstate. If I'm looking at, Anthony, where are you going to close this month? I'm managing both upside and downside because I want to make sure that I know what's happening in the business.
So how do you set your budget for the year? If you're like, how are you forecasting for the 365 for the year ahead, and then how do you set your budget accordingly?
So I actually forecast my year by taking my forecast for 90 days, taking those customers that are renewing in the next quarter, because those I know a lot about. The ones I know in the next 6 months, I then add them into it. And then the ones in between the 6 months and a year, those are the ones I know least about in terms of whether or not they're going to renew. I may have some early signals. And so I then add those up to come up with, here's what I'm expecting or what I'm projecting at this point for my annual forecast. Then I work with finance and I build models based upon because I've worked with some very, very conservative accountants and finance teams that love to take even my forecast and lower a bit when it comes to how much, where do we spend? What do we spend? Because we don't want to go all the way up to our number just in case there's some misses. Yeah. So let's go through and take maybe 90% of what I'm forecasting and build our models off that 90%. And so I go through that iteration with them until we get to a point where we're doing some sensitivity analysis. If we're off by 9% on this or 2% here, what does that do for our overall cash flow and our overall profit? And once we get to the point where we have a model that's not as sensitive or within sensitivity range, then we're good. And so that's the way I normally work with finance. I come up with my number, they come with theirs, we end up modeling and put some levers in to see how sensitive the models are. If it's highly sensitive, we don't go with that one. We figure out how do we make it a little bit more hardened.
Yep. And before the show, we also talk about the lying at GRR.
My favorite post of the week.
Yes. Like, in your finance model, do you also separate the locked-in renewal, the real ARR?
I've never had a company do that. And as we were talking beforehand, I've worked in companies where we had multi-year enterprise deals. We only had like 2,500 accounts, and everyone, because of the amount of money we have coming in, we assign a CSM. I've worked in that type of environment where the economics coming in, I can assign a CSM to every single account. Well, we didn't worry about lock-ins then. Hey, revenue was revenue. But now that I've spent 5 years in an outcome-based model with no notice contracts, meaning customers can leave at any time, that gave me a different perspective on NRR and GRR. Those two worlds are not the same. I had no safety net for 5 years where I couldn't rely on the contract language to keep account or to give me even time to work on any issues with the account. And so when I saw that post from some of the leaders of Gainsight this week that talked about really measuring NRR and GRR, not just based upon the money that's there on the contract, but really drilling in to how much of your revenue is up for renewal. That tends to make you look at things a little differently. It may not change how you forecast, but it will change how you behave. Because if you're just looking at NRR and that's your core metric, that NRR could hide that 90% of your accounts are locked up on the 3-year contracts, and only 10% of your accounts are actually up for renewal this year. When you strip that out and get directly to how much money is up for renewal, that will cause, and measure that purely on the amount of money that's up for renewal, that will cause a different behavior from a CS team, different urgency from everyone involved, because that now takes the safety net away. And that's the environment I lived in 5 years. And I struggled in trying to describe the differences that I felt between those different environments. And that post gave me a way of doing it. So I was loving that post. I even reposted it because it was just so good to me. It gave me a language for describing the differences in those two environments. I'm off my soapbox now.
Well, something you make me think about the language, contract language. Like if you're in a multi-year, people like clients can still break out of contract by paying a penalty or something, right? Somehow you still need to manage that contract, shouldn't we?
You should, but in most companies, the language, at least my experience, the language was such that the customer either paid for the remainder of the contract, which gave you time to try to win them back, or at least before that renewal or that churn hit the actual numbers. Because technically they've given me their notice, but they're under contract for another year. It's only at the end of that expiration does it really hit my number. And so this is where the number you report to the board, which they are very focused on NRR and GRR, which is appropriate. But from an operating perspective, I may want to drill into that and have my own operating thresholds based upon the revenue that's actually at risk this quarter, or at least up for renewal. It just it pushes a different type of urgency. Now, I'm not saying that urgency is needed in every scenario. I'm not saying that at all. But it's something I think people should investigate. If you're a CS leader or a CRO and you have a sizable book of business locked up with your existing customers, I think you should look into that and see what's going on if you were remove those lock-ins. What actually, how is your system actually performing? Because lock-ins can hide the actual rot that's going on underneath the covers. What happened to me in the company where we had the 4-year contracts or the 3-year contracts is, we had that safety net. The customer was locked in. But if things were rotting within the customer, we often didn't know it until the customer actually churned. They didn't necessarily give early notice because they were under they read the contract just as like we read it. They knew they were locked in until the end of the year or to whatever the renewal date was. And so we wouldn't find out that they were leaving until the notification period before the renewal. At that point, I won't say it's too late, but it's extremely hard to change direction. What if you treated this differently, where you looked at every account as if you had no lock-in? That creates a different urgency, a different rhythm, a different cadence. It gives you a different read on how healthy your system is in terms of delivering value and driving revenue.
How do you do that when you have a large customer base and you don't necessarily, the CS to customer ratio is larger than you would want? How do you manage that? How do you manage that in a company, again, with a large customer base? You don't get that ratio, right, that you would hope for, and you have CS managing a large number of accounts.
So this is where you have to think about your customer success strategy outside of your CSMs. In many companies, I see that CS strategy equals what are the CSMs doing. In my last company, and this is where this really broke for me. I had seen Nick Mehta and others talk about this in other, in Pulse and other places, but this is when that really became real for me. In that last company, we had 70,000 organizations using the product. I had 4 CSMs.
Yeah, exactly, right?
I could not think about my CS strategy in terms of what my CSMs were going to do. Mm-hmm. I absolutely had to work with product and primarily because in that environment, we found that the best channel for communicating value and dealing with issues was actually through the product, not through email, but through the product. So our product became our primary channel for how do we deal with issues, to detect issues, and even get information from our customers. It was through the product. So I became best friends with product. And I looked at my strategy purely first, what can I do through product? Secondly, what can I do through marketing to catch those customers who weren't logging in or those users who weren't logging in? How can I get them back into the product? And then on top of that, I added my CSMs. So the CSMs were not the strategy. They were the icing on top of the strategy, not the strategy itself. And if you take that approach, then you build into your SaaS product, I won't say questionnaires, but user experiences that try to gauge where they fit.
Yeah, like
for example,
product adoption, right, is a good one.
Well, it's not just product adoption. It's how are you using your product to get the buying signals you may need? Mm-hmm. Ask them questions. Onboarding doesn't happen just once a year. When they first sign up, think about, at least in my space, we knew our customers were in the last space of the company I work for. We knew customers went through an annual planning process. They had an annual budget they need to hit. What if we asked them, what's your budget this year? What are you expecting in terms of your revenue or your fundraising this year? Now that lets us understand how close are we to hitting their expected value, and then respond through the product with different strategies to help them hit their fundraising value. It's thinking about now the things that I would normally ask a CSM to go do. How now can I get that to scale by getting that information through the product? Doesn't mean that they all will share that information. They didn't. Many of them didn't. But the few that did gave me insight then to what were they expecting, how would they value, or how would they judge our value. And so it causes that resource constraint just caused me to think about CS in a totally different way.
Well, I also want to say, have you got those NPS in product?
I do have NPS in product, but don't get me started on NPS. I'm not a big fan of NPS. Not as a customer health metric. It just really doesn't measure the right thing for me. And so I'm more in line with looking at things like CSAT and actual usage of sticky features versus asking a customer, hey, would you recommend us? And the reason why I got burnt on NPS, I've worked for companies where customers loved us and they would recommend us, but they would leave us at the same time. And the reason was the perception was we were for a certain size company or for companies in a certain strategy. And if their strategy changed while they would recommend us, they wouldn't stay with us because they felt we weren't suited for where they were going. If I'm going to do something like NPS, I prefer to be more direct and ask the question, if you were to renew today, would you? If so, why and why not?
We asked that.
Yep. Would you ask that
That's
in product?
A better read.
Would you ask that in the product?
Oh, did I ask that in the product? It depends on the user. It depends on the customer, whether or not they would be, whether or not someone that's using our product is likely to be a decision maker. Because oftentimes in a SaaS company in particular, the person using the product is not a decision maker. So you have to figure out how do you get to the decision maker to ask that question. Now you can ask a variation of the question from the user who may be an influencer but not the decider. Ask them, if you were asked if you would renew. If your CFO or whoever came to you to ask you, would you recommend, continuing with this product? What would you say? That could be a way you can ask a user who's not in a decision-making seat the same question to get a gauge of how would they influence the decision if they were allowed to. So you have to really understand your user and your customer to figure out if you can ask that question or ask similar questions through the product.
I know we cover so many topics today, and it's really interesting. We're almost to our end of our time. If there's one habit we'd like the audience to memorize today to bulletproof your 2026 forecast, what would that be? Roland?
The number one habit, create good habits, right? And repeatable habits that you can stick to, right? I think that's the number one thing is you see teams, they say they're going to do things away, right? They're going to do this, they're going to do that. But then, time goes, they don't stick to them. Things just drag off. Our number one habit is that we have our CEO on every single pipeline review. And it's repeatable. It's consistent. And I would say consistency, right? Like be consistent on how you forecast. Don't change direction in the middle of the year. If you're forecasting one way, just keep going. That would be my advice.
How about you?
So I'm gonna build on something because I see a thread. I mean, this is NPS is just like it's a minefield. Any company today that's using NPS as a way of measuring health and trying to figure out whether or not a customer's going to renew or if you have an expansion opportunity, please stop. Jan has in the comment here, and I totally agree. NPS, I think, was designed for a different purpose and potentially even for a different type of customer. It may be more aligned to B2C more so than anything else. I actually think it's more of a branding thing. It's more of asking them how they feel about your product. It's not really about what their behaviors are going to be if asked incorrectly or managed incorrectly. So any health system or any sort of forecasting system that includes NPS, I think you need to go back and revisit. That's just my personal experience and my opinion, but I do think there are better metrics or better risk gauges that you can use to produce more accurate forecasts than NPS.
And I like what Roland said before, having your reps really understand their customers, not just relying on what AI generate to fill in the CRM.
There's just something.
Consistency.
Bingo. I think, Roland, from what I hear, the most brilliant thing you guys have going for you is that you have the CEO on every single call, every single, business review. That adds a certain weight and gravitas that makes people step up to the plate. They know their stuff when they're walking into the room. They can anticipate the level of questions that they're going to be asked. And so it causes them to do research, causes them to do the legwork to really understand the deal and the customer and what it's going to take to close. I think that is brilliant.
Yeah, and we have a couple words that we're not allowed to use in forecasting, and one is hope. I hope we hope. We always say hope is for the Pope. Hope is for the Pope, and we can't rely on hope for any kind. I hope this closes. We're hoping he signs or she signs. We're hoping. We are not allowed to use hope in our forecasting calls.
I love that. That discipline is just, second to none. So I definitely appreciate you adding that in, having a CRO or head of revenue kind of perspective there and how you can build that discipline in, I think is so great. And
it just, right, I think it prepares reps to be like I always say, be a pro, right? Be a pro, show up to these calls as a pro. This might sound harsh, but we will ask reps to leave the meeting if they're not prepared.
Yes.
Sorry, you're not prepared.
Some of the best calls I've ever been on is when the executive doesn't have a problem with ending the call.
Yeah.
If the rep or the person presented presenting is not prepared. It's just not a great use of people's time. It's a harsh lesson to learn for those that are on the other end of it, but it is a good lesson to learn because I guarantee you they won't make that mistake again.
Yeah, and you don't want to be that rep in front of your peers.
You don't want to be that person, because it's, you know, I don't know how many people you guys used to have on your pipeline calls, but in the calls I have, it's actually done amongst all the leadership. Not every leader, but I invite other leaders into my pipeline calls and into because I don't want any secrets. And plus, if I have product in the room, I want them to ask the question, okay, what about this? What can I do to help move that forward? So having that room open, but having that discipline to say, hey, listen, you're not prepared. Go back. We'll schedule in for the, you know, later in this round or whatever, because you still need to come back, but we want you to prepare it when you come back. You don't get to skip. We're calling you back in, but today you just don't have it. We're going to move on to the next person.
Yeah, I love that. Love it.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. And if anybody have questions, where's the best way to contact you?
LinkedIn. Yeah, shoot me a message on LinkedIn. Love it.
Yeah, same for me. LinkedIn is probably the best way. I'm more active now, thanks to Emma and Jan pushing me. So thank you guys for pushing me, but definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. Would love to connect, love to learn. You know, if there's something I said here or shared that you don't agree with, please challenge me. Because all I'm sharing is from my experience and what I've seen work, but it doesn't mean it works for everyone because I haven't experienced everything. So I'm willing to learn. So please challenge me.
All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for your time, and we'll see you next time. Happy 2026 coming on.
Jeez. Wow. And except for Roland. Yeah. He's still in 2025.
He's already halfway.